Yeah, because this episode kind of came about one day when I was just thinking, would he have won another title if he'd stuck with Mercedes? Because obviously everyone's talked quite a lot about how much he had to sacrifice in 2016 just to try and best Lewis Hamilton. But how did his previous performances stack up? What was the rest of his career like? Do we think he had the potential to continue and follow in the footsteps of people like Lewis, Sebastian Vettel, and these other drivers that have gone on to win multiple world championships?
And I mean, you've done some digging, because for a long time Nico was a bit of a midfield runner, wasn't he? He started with Mercedes, started with Williams, and moved to Mercedes, but he was with them from the early days. So you're you've looked into his past results and picked out a couple of the highlights, right?
Yeah. So the reason that I thought it would be interesting to kind of look a bit more into Rosberg is because Bottas is obviously coming under a lot of fire at the minute for his performance, and it's quite interesting how closely aligned Bottas and Rosberg's careers have been, because they both started at Williams, had 4 or 5 seasons there, and then moved to Mercedes and had 4 or 5 seasons there where they were partnered with multiple winning world champions. And they've kind of constantly been compared to those drivers. But in the early days with Rosberg, he joined Williams in 2006, and he was partnered with Mark Webber initially. It wasn't the most successful partnership he had with Williams. In his first season, he finished 7th. He got his first points at the Bahrain Grand Prix, which was the season opener that year, but then through the rest of the year it wasn't really too glowing. The following year he did improve a little bit, and you could see that he kind of integrated himself in the team a little bit better. He ended up finishing 9th. He'd amassed 20 points over the year, and his highest result was 4th, but he was still kind of chasing that first podium or that first win. And his first podium didn't actually come until 2008, when he was still with Williams, and he finished 3rd in Australia, and that was the season opener that year.
So I remember from that race, there's a really cool clip of, because Lewis won that race, it's his first championship winning year, and in the cool down room they were just so I think Lewis walked in and their eyes just lit up like you get when two best friends see each other, and they just jumped around and hugged each other, and they were totally elated, and you could tell they were really good mates and happy for each other. It wasn't just kind of heat of the moment.
No, I remember seeing that too. They both just seemed so excited and so, like you say, delighted for each other. But the interesting thing that I learned while researching this, McLaren actually approached Williams with the idea of having Rosberg in their team for the 2008 season following the departure of Alonso. So it would have been interesting if the two of them had to become teammates earlier on in their careers, whether we'd have seen the same kind of fractures that we did later on, or if because they'd grown up together they would have pushed each other a little bit more positively. But how different things could have been if Rosberg had ended up in a slightly more competitive car early on. Because while Williams is one of the most historic and famous teams on the grid, during the 2006 to 2009 it wasn't exactly the winning team that it has been and would then be a few years later.
No, and it would have also been an opportunity for him to be pushing for a number 1 driver spot at a competitive team, and in the same way Lewis would have not necessarily been the outright number 1. But then it probably also patience is a virtue, and gaining that experience over the next few years, staying at Williams and then moving to the Mercedes that we don't know of today, probably, while he wasn't winning races straight away in his career like Lewis was, it, in the long run, probably did teach him quite a lot, and if not, drove him more to be that championship winner that he became.
Yeah, and he was definitely putting in performances that were getting him noticed. I mean, for McLaren to want to try and poach him from Williams, that was after 2007, when he finished ninth in the drivers' standings. In 2008, he ended the year 13th with 17 points to his name, and then in 2009, he ended up with 34.5 points over the 17 races, and it was. And his highest finishes that year came in Germany and Hungary, when he claimed 4th place. So you could see that through the years he was edging his way up the grid. He'd definitely figured out the way to kind of bring the team around him, and 2006 was actually the only year during his time at the team where he was out-qualified by his teammate. After that, he consistently finished ahead of everyone that he was partnered with. So he'd clearly proven himself as quite a competitive driver and someone that knew their way around the car. So I don't think it was super surprising when, towards the middle of 2009, reports started to emerge that Mercedes were looking to sign Nico onto the new team, which was it was their Brawn GP team, got bought by Mercedes, and they relaunched in the beginning of 2010 with Nico Rosberg and Michael Schumacher as their drivers. So it was this big all-German team that was ready to bring Mercedes back to Formula One for the first time. And it was quite exciting to see a very established driver like Michael, who'd come out of retirement, paired with this quite hopeful new prospect that, while didn't have the wins under his belt, had sort of proven himself so far with the results and shown improvement each year that he'd been in this.
He must have really kind of thanked his lucky stars, because Brawn were dominant in the first half of that 2009 season with their double diffuser, and then everyone kind of caught up. But they just weren't competitive in 2010. They finished 4th with 3 podiums, all 3rd places. They didn't get any wins, and so it must have been a real letdown to commit to a team that you think would be up there with Ferrari, McLaren, and the Red Bulls, and it just wasn't there. And that could have again been an early opportunity for him. You know, he could have signed for McLaren in 2008 or 9, and he could have been in a really fast car, or he was joining a really fast team that just didn't have a really fast car in 2010. But it did pair him with the greatest driver of all time at that time, Michael Schumacher, who I would like to say he probably learnt a lot from. But listening to a podcast with him today, it does not seem that was necessarily the case. Because he was kind of saying that Michael was the kind of guy that if he saw you as a threat or a rival, he'd keep his cards close to his chest. So he wasn't as giving as maybe other teammates could be to a young driver.
Yeah, and I read a few things that kind of clips from interviews ahead of the 2010 season, where Rosberg was saying that he was a little bit apprehensive about what the relationship would be like between Michael and Ross Brawn, who was still leading the Mercedes team at that time, because they'd obviously worked together at Ferrari when Michael had been winning all these championships. And he was a little bit apprehensive that he might be sort of not cast to one side, but clearly not the number one driver. But in spite of that, he did go on to have the better season than the 7-time world champion. He, over the course of the year, Schumacher outperformed Rosberg just 5 times in the 19 races, and Rosberg finished the season in 7th with 142 points. Through the 2010 season, his best performances came in Malaysia, China, and Britain, where he secured third place. Like you said, it was the only 3 podium finishes for the team that year. So it was really nice to see him just come in and stamp his name on the team and be like, I'm the competitive driver. I'm the one that's going to get the podiums. It was obviously strange for people that had grown up being Michael Schumacher fans and seeing him dominating, to see him just be a little bit off the pace and not as cutthroat and competitive as everyone remembered.
Yeah, but I also would expect that was the reason. That wasn't the reason necessarily why Michael was brought into Mercedes. They were rebranding, relaunching, so it's great for their image, first and foremost. Like it's fantastic to be bringing 7-time world champion out of retirement to drive your car. But also they were starting afresh, almost. You know, they were really distancing themselves from the Honda and the brawn that had come before them, and were trying to build something new. And I'm sure while he might have not let on anything to Nico as a competitor, I'm sure the team benefited immensely over the years that we know them now. They've become so dominant. A lot of that was probably down to some of the groundwork that Michael Schumacher put down. Yeah,
I would definitely agree. And the two of them worked together over 3 seasons, I think it was in the end. So they must have built up quite a positive teamwork during that time, because the team did improve over the 3 years, and Rosberg had his first win in a Mercedes, and that came in China in 2012, where he qualified on pole and finished the race 20 seconds ahead of Jenson Button, who finished second. So that was really showing the pace that the team had. Through the years, they were kind of plagued by a couple of issues, like the drivers were complaining about tyre wear quite a lot, was one area that the Mercedes seemed to struggle. But during this time, Formula One was dominated by Red Bull and Sebastian Vettel. So to see, it's like how now we're pleased to see anyone that isn't Mercedes win. Back then, you were pretty happy to see anyone that wasn't a Red Bull win.
Yeah, and that Chinese win in 2012 was actually his first ever pole position as well. So a dominant weekend from Nico Rosberg was something that we would come to get used to, but we definitely weren't then.
Yeah, for sure. But as I mentioned with Williams and how Rosberg outperformed his teammates throughout his time there, this continued at Mercedes, and in 2010, 11 and 12 he did perform better than Michael Schumacher each year. So he finished the season in 7th in 2011 and 9th in 2012, and in 2012 Schumacher was 13th. So that was a decent few pegs above, but his reign as the team's number one came under fire in 2013 when one Lewis Hamilton joined Mercedes.
He did, and it was a controversial move. Everyone was shocked because they thought he was just moving for the money. They didn't treat Mercedes as competitors, despite finishing second in that season. It was kind of like we came to know Mercedes. It was Red Bull at the top, and then just everyone else filtered down. And I guess, given on past performances, McLaren's pace probably looked like a blip, a bit like Ferrari's in 2020. So the consensus would have been, why don't you just stick with McLaren? They'll end up bringing it back. But I'm sure he saw the vision of what could happen at Mercedes, and sure enough, he was right.
Yeah. And I also wonder if he's maybe seen some of McLaren's struggles coming, because in the years that followed his departure, that team really did take a turn, and he definitely made the right move in stepping away.
Yeah, so maybe Lewis had the foresight of what was coming. He still had a pretty decent season with a fledgling team. He came 4th in 2013, regardless of where the team finished. So he could still extract something. I mean, that's a sign of what Lewis Hamilton could do, right? You could put him in a in a Rodney Trotter's three-wheeled car, Del Boy's three-wheeled car, whatever, and he'd still end up putting it on the podium. So yeah, maybe there were just signs of what Mercedes were working on. And there's that partnership, isn't there? McLaren and Mercedes, they were making the engines for McLaren. Maybe he could just see how that was moving in the direction they were going in. Who knows? But yeah, ultimately the right decision.
Yeah, for sure. And the 2013 season, Hamilton did come in and immediately outperform Rosberg. So, like you said, Hamilton finished fourth with Rosberg in sixth at the end of the year. Through the course of the season, both drivers did claim victories, but Rosberg won two. He took the win in Monaco and Great Britain, whereas Hamilton just won in Hungary. But that wasn't enough to stop Hamilton's, I guess, consistent form throughout the year, and he was just able to extract more from the car. But then obviously everything changed come 2014 when we entered the turbo hybrid era. And this is where things start to really get spicy in the Rosberg story.
It started so well for Rosberg. This season he won race 1 in Australia and Hamilton retired. So he had a pretty healthy lead over his teammate at that point.
Yeah, and it kind of continued to be really close between the two of them through the whole season. It would be like Hamilton would win, Rosberg would be second, Rosberg would win, Hamilton would be second.
Yeah, there were 10 Mercedes 1-2s throughout the course of that season, and 8 of them were Hamilton winning the race and Rosberg in second. Rosberg won the first race of the season when Hamilton retired, and a race in Germany where Lewis came third. Apart from that, kind of throughout the season, yes, the Mercedes was dominant, but it was also very clear that Hamilton was the dominant driver in that team. He didn't win them all from pole. There were a couple that he has made it past Nico for whatever reason, and vice versa. There are races where Lewis started on pole and Nico made it round. But this was only, as well, we forget this, Lewis Hamilton's second world championship.
Yeah, I know. It seems so long ago now. 2014 was also kind of a turning point for the pair's relationship, I feel. Because, like you mentioned, in 2008, we'd seen them both so friendly and excited to be on the podium together. But now, as they were both in a world championship winning car and they were both fighting for wins and ultimately the championship, you started to see the cracks form and things were obviously not quite as rosy in the Mercedes garage as we'd been used to.
So I've been thinking about this because obviously we talk like spoiler alert, it got a little bit more frosty. But while we're talking about like their friendship and their personal relationship, comparing it to like the modern grid, like we know that like Lando and Carlos were great mates at McLaren. We know that Lando and George were great mates, and they play video games all the time, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And at this stage, it's difficult to imagine them becoming bitter rivals, especially when George moves to Mercedes later this year, not if. You could have a situation where you have got George, Carlos, Lando, and even Carlos and Charles at Ferrari within the same team, all get on really well. Could you imagine it frosting over as much as Nico and Lewis's relationship did? Or are we just in a different time now?
I feel like some relationships would undoubtedly go frosty. But then, obviously, Lando and Carlos weren't fighting for wins that often, but they were definitely, through the year, both trying to outperform each other. And while they'd get a little close and get a little dicey on track, afterwards, or preceding the race, they'd still be super friendly with each other. So, I feel like a relationship like that maybe wouldn't. But when you hear all these stories about how Lewis and Nico had got up through karting together and been mates forever, just to see theirs go so sour so quickly was a bit of a shock. But undoubtedly one event that did spark the turning point was the Monaco Grand Prix in 2014, when both drivers had been fighting for pole because they were the best cars on the grid, and Rosberg had set the fastest time, but both him and Hamilton were going for another lap, and Rosberg mysteriously locked up and ended up basically parking his car at Mirabeau, which meant the yellow flags came out and Hamilton had to slow down his lap. So Rosberg kept pole and then ultimately won the race. And this was before we'd started to see team orders and things start to creep in, as Toto Wolff tried to get a handle on the situation. But when you're both fighting for the win, what do you think of tactics like that? If you're in the same team and you know one of you's going to be on pole, how do you feel about a move like
that? It's similar to what Michael Schumacher did, isn't it? At Raskas years ago, where he purposely crashed and so no one else could set a time. And that's, I think, what instilled the seed in everyone's head that that's what Charles did at Monaco this year. It's not cool, is it? But is it confirmed that he did it on purpose?
It's not confirmed, but would you ever be able to confirm something like that?
That's the thing.
It's strongly alluded to.
Innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah, the Friday Formula lawyers cannot confirm nor deny.
Well, I mean, like, I don't want to jump ahead in the story, but something happens in one of his last races where he doesn't win the race, but the driver who does wins it with some dirty tactics involved. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of widely accepted, or it had been put to Nico that you wouldn't have wanted to win a race like that. And he was like, no, well, of course not. Like, if you're not fast enough, you're not fast enough. You have to win it by being fast enough. So I'd like to think, I think Nico is a pretty trustworthy character. But if you did it on purpose, it's not cool.
No. But it is, like you say, it's interesting how not dirty tactics, but definite tactics.
Yeah.
were pretty prevalent throughout the Rosberg, Hamilton, Mercedes era. Like the closest we've got since Rosberg left would be Bottas at Sochi, giving Verstappen a bit of a tow because he knew he wanted to be third rather than second.
Yeah.
But
there's
it's not quite the same.
A good line as well.
We're not going to see Bottas throwing a hat across the room.
The drama. Nico said that it was very clear throughout all of the time he was at Mercedes with Toto anyway, that if one of the cars had the opportunity to win the race, no matter who it was, no matter what the championship standings were, if you weren't winning the race but you were in front of a driver who could win the race, you were giving up that spot no matter where you were. So again, I think he was kept honest in that way at Mercedes, and I can imagine Nico doing that. It just appears, I think they still have the same rule. I just think Lewis is always in front of Valtteri, and so he's always the one with the shot of winning for one reason or another, whether it's pace or tactics or strategy or whatever.
Yeah. And throughout 2014 and 2015, while it was very close between Lewis and Nico, it did kind of come Lewis's way, let's say 9 times out of 10. And so Lewis did win the championship in 2014 and 2015. Interestingly, could you tell me who the only non-Mercedes driver to win a race in 2014 was? Have you got the wins up right in front of you now?
Grid.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't help myself.
Wait, what about 2015?
Okay, I can't do 2015. Is it Daniel Ricciardo?
It's not, no.
Ooh. Kimi?
No. Same team, though.
Seb?
Yeah.
Ah.
Seb won 3 of the races. Mercedes won the other 16, though, so it's not a lot to write home about. But one moment I wanted to quiz you about in 2015. Oh no, not 2015. Sorry, I've got something else before then. So, Lewis tied up the 2015 season at the US Grand Prix, and that seemingly spurred on Nico in a way that I've not really seen with Valtteri, because he went on to win the last 3 races of the 2015 season and the first 4 rounds of 2016. So he was really on a winning streak. But the following race in Spain, the two famously came together. Now, Will, whose fault was it?
Nico Rosberg's.
Why are you so confident that it was his fault?
Because Lewis clearly had the speed on him, and he had the space, and then all of a sudden, he didn't have the space.
Yeah.
It was stupid, wasn't it? But also brilliant.
Yeah, it's a hard agree on my side. There was space for the two of them on track. How they ended up coming together is just beyond me. It's just nuts.
Can you imagine having to go back and face the wrath of Toto Wolff?
No. That's not a place I'd want to be. Because he obviously has this kind of cheeky but scary demeanour. But still, I don't want to see him angry. I've seen him punch the desk. I don't want to be on the receiving end of one of those punches.
He restrained himself in Baku, didn't he? He went for it and then he was like, keep it cool, Toto.
The rest of 2016 did continue to be quite close, but it ultimately went Nico Rosberg's way, and he finished the season with 10 wins to his name and 385 points, which put him just 5 clear of his teammate Lewis Hamilton, and meant that he secured the drivers' championship for the first time. And you've alluded to the final race of the season being quite key in that. What was it that happened there?
So, oh god, I can't remember the exact permutations, but Lewis got pole, led from the start, and then Nico ended up in 3rd, which is where he needed to be. Lewis had the pace, or maybe he was in 2nd. I assume he was in 2nd actually. Where he needs to be to finish the championship, there was nothing Lewis could do because Nico had some pretty clear air in front of him. The only thing he thinks he could, or he thought he could do, back everyone up and hope Vettel behind him makes a move and overtakes him. Thus, the point gap between them grows and he wins the championship. It's clever. I think most other drivers would secure the win and just hope. If it's fate and it's meant to be, it's meant to be. I don't think many other drivers would have the balls of Lewis Hamilton to try and manipulate the race like that.
Everyone down.
Yeah, it's so clever. And there's not many people that could even try and he nearly did it. He really nearly did it. Vettel nearly did it on the penultimate lap.
But he did get a stern word from then technical director Paddy Lowe, asking him to get a hurry on.
Yeah, and he just said no.
It was such a bizarre scene to watch unfold.
Yeah.
Abu Dhabi's already quite boring. Why would you purposefully try and slow it down?
Oh, yeah, at least he gave us a good race at Abu Dhabi, though.
That's true. then, so at the end of the race, Rosberg did win the title, but then just after, announced his retirement from the sport. The last driver to announce a retirement just after winning a title was Alain Prost. So Nico stepped back, and Bottas stepped in. Comparing those two, Bottas and Rosberg, do you think if Rosberg hadn't retired, he could have clinched another world title, or did it take so much commitment from him just to get that one that he maybe was drained and ready to become full-time YouTuber?
I think the Formula One World Championship was a brilliant step into his YouTube career, to be honest. I think it works in both ways, because Nico would have gone into the 2017 season with a massive confidence of being the world champion. And again, we're caveating this in that, like, we're essentially changing Nico Rosberg's mindset when we talk about this and imagine him going into 2017, because he wasn't up for it.
No.
So we're imagining that he was. He'd have had a massive confidence. I think Lewis Hamilton would have been fired up, but that doesn't necessarily mean he would have been a better driver.
No. Because it is interesting how you see Lewis perform the week after he's not done as well. And obviously, he had a rival in 2017, but maybe not someone quite on the same level. So he didn't really have to kind of outperform anyone in order to prove himself quite as much. Because as we're seeing with a lot of drivers this year, it takes a little while to get used to a new team. So, while Bottas has his moments, he wasn't ever going to be a threat in 2000.
No, and he's just never really... He wasn't as good. He's never been as good as Rosberg. Like, we've seen some brilliant racing from Hamilton and Rosberg in the past, like the duel in the desert. And we've seen glimpses of that with Bottas. I think Silverstone 2018 comes to mind, 18 or 19, where, you know, they slung it side by side for a couple of laps and they swapped positions, and that was great. But nothing on the scale that Rosberg had. And he had that, like you said,
No.
He got that winning streak locked down at the beginning of the 2016 season. He carried that confidence through where he won the final 3 races. It fired him up, and it set him up for the best year of his life. Bottas doesn't seem to be able to string results and have that consistency that Rosberg did.
Through the 14, 15 and 16 seasons, he'd have retirements and races where it didn't quite go as he'd hoped. And then he'd come back the week later and finish first or second. And he was just always there on Lewis's tail, ready to race him for the win, which is just not something we see these days. So I think if he'd stayed in, we would have seen a much more interesting World Championship in the following years.
Yep.
I don't know if that would have translated to more victories for Rosberg, though.
No. I worry that if he stayed, he would have just broken down, because he put so much effort into that 2016 season. Things like...
Supposedly they moved into a different house away from his family and stuff like that.
Yeah, but his attention to detail was extraordinary. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but for every kilogram of muscle you have on your legs, someone told him if you lose a kilogram, it will result in being a tenth quicker on a pole lap, on a quali lap. So he lost 2 kilograms of leg muscle for the Japanese Grand Prix, and he took pole by 3/10. So yeah, he would have taken it by a tenth, but it's that difference. And also, like, who figures that out? Who works shit like that out? Yeah. But then there were things that Nico figured out himself. So all of the gloves used to have seams that ran across the top of the finger. And he realised that it didn't give him as much control because that extra quarter of an inch,
resistance, I guess,
or the extra quarter of an inch was tapping before he wanted his finger to. So now all the drivers have seamless gloves because Nico Rosberg realised that it's better, you have more control. Well, things like turning the controls as well and pressing buttons. And that just incremental changes. And that's what he was always about. Little changes make big steps.
Yeah.
And I think it's just an entire philosophy that only world champions can have. And like Lewis Hamilton has a philosophy. Nico Rosberg had one. And Valtteri Bottas is his porridge and coffee. Like, what is Valtteri Bottas' philosophy? He doesn't have one. So do you think he would have won any more championships if he'd stayed with Mercedes for, let's say he stayed for 3 years?
Maybe one more. Maybe 2017. But then specifically with 2019, I feel like that was a year where Lewis that was when he seemed like he was on another level. So like 2019 and 2020, he's obviously like 5 world championships in by then, but it seemed like he really took a step up. So maybe Rosberg could have sustained his meticulous attention to detail and his drive to win in 2017, but then, like you say, the pressure of competing like that week in, week out, and he'd already won the world championship. He didn't have anything else to prove by beating Lewis again. And I guess when you've got to that level, the thing to aim for is like the next record. So he's beaten Lewis, he's got his world champion. He's beaten Lewis, he's got his world championship, but he's not going to want to commit to carrying on going to try and take Schumacher's record. And I guess it's kind of balancing, do you just want to be a world champion or do you want to be a record breaker? If you just want to be a world champion, you're very happy with it, just call it a day and go off and enjoy your life in Monaco with your kids and making YouTube videos. I feel like I would have, I'm very much not in the same way, but I would have been like that. I'd have been like, it's not worth the effort. Not that it's not worth the effort, but
it's a bigger picture. He has an idea of the bigger picture in life, right?
Yeah, the commitments and the kind of sacrifices that you've got to make.
Yeah. Whereas,
is it worth it?
Someone like Max Verstappen, who is winning races and in championship competing cars from a very young age, is actually talking about, well, I hope Lewis doesn't get that record because it's a lower record for me to go and get. And he has this long career span in front of him where he can see himself picking off the championships. Like Nico's picked off his in his 11th season. In his 11th season in Formula 1. You can win another couple and that will be great. But like you say, go and enjoy your life, man, and stop worrying about losing leg muscle. Like, just enjoy your legs.
It's like your advice to any drivers considering retirement. Just take a time off, enjoy your legs.
That is the title of this episode when it goes up on YouTube. Enjoy your legs. That is our life story of Nico Rosberg and a glimpse into what could have been in an alternate reality had he stayed in Formula 1. We're going for he might have won one more world championship. Let us know what you think. Go down to the comments, let us know while you're there. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. It will really do us good. You'll also find in the description of this video a link to our Twitter account at Friday Formula, where you can keep up to date with the latest content. While you're on Twitter, you can also follow us on our personal accounts. I am at Will Longman, Owen is
at Owen_Belwood.
And then when you followed us on Twitter, head back to the description of this video. You can check out our Fantasy League. It's a triple header, so there's lots of points on offer. We're gone from, what are we, race 6 or 7 in the championship. We'll speed through the next 3. That's an opportunity for us to stop losing. But not if you join and start beating us too. And join us next week where we'll be chatting about the race, Paul Ricard. Will it be the most exciting Paul Ricard Grand Prix on record?
Yes.
That's what I want to hear. Join us back next week where we laugh and cry about that statement being not true. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.